the only thing with that is, I think because we're about to go live, but I think we want to make it sort of casual. So, I often forget to hit the mute button.
Hello, everyone. I am Peggy Hogan, Pop Symposium Director. I am here live from Rialto Hall, where our in-person symposium events are taking place. This is a virtual event, so welcome to you all. I'm very excited for this inaugural event of the hybrid Pop Symposium 2020. I just wanted to start off with a quick land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that though we are hosting this event online, we are physically based in the unceded lands of Ganya-Gahaga Nation. Pop Montreal encourages everyone who attends our events to become informed and involved about the work of anti-colonial and Indigenous-led struggles, and the specific work of resistance in these areas where you live. And we would also like to acknowledge the solidarity that exists between Indigenous resistance and Black liberation struggles, and that working toward decolonization also includes supporting Black lives and Black liberation. So with that, I would like to hand off this fabulous event to our co-presenters over at Welcome Collective. So please, warm welcome to Noelle Sorvara.
Hi, everyone. I am very nervous to present this because this event is so very, very, very close to my heart, with a lot of people who I've known for a long time and people who are very dear to me here or behind the scenes. So I just wanted to present the event very quickly and start by saying some thank yous. This is a collaboration with a whole bunch of people. First, I just want to shout out to the people at Peace Day. They came to Welcome Collective and they asked us to put on an event for Peace Day. Peace Day has events from September 17th to October 17th. So we're one of the events. So a shout out to Audrey and Brian Bronfman for getting us involved. Collaboration obviously with Pop Montreal, thanks to that whole team, Peggy Hogan, Jennifer Dorner, of course, Dan Seligman, who started the festival and has had it evolve all the way through to today, even during a pandemic. So a shout out to all that team doing all that work during this crazy time. So great, huge thanks to Pop Montreal for helping us out here. Of course, the Welcome Collective. I just want to throw out a special thank you to Allah Mohammed Ahmed, who works with Welcome Collective and has really poured her heart and her passion into this project with the help of Rani Cruz. So from our team, thank you so much, Allah and Rani. And then finally, Emancipation Arts. And I just want to shout out to Ngozi Paul. So Ngozi I've known for quite a while. She's a very dear and wonderful friend. And when we were invited to do an event, she's actually the first person I thought of to collaborate with because of her amazing work. So I'll give you a little bit of her bio. She started out at Stratford at the age of 20. She co-created, executive produced, and acted in The Kink in My Hair, a network television series that went on for several years around the world. A very notable television series. We're having a crew of women of color who produced it and created it and made it into the wonderful show that it was. And then she went on to do Care for Color, a docuseries in the US, and Emancipation of Miss Lovely, a one-woman show that she wrote and she starred in that got 6 Doras, including Outstanding Play. And then also Free Up, which is kind of why we're here today, a youth-led a youth-led festival of artists and creators to celebrate the Emancipation Day, the day that slavery ended in 1834 on August 1st in the British Empire. So all of her work around that to shine a light on that day, its importance, what it means to us today, and really getting the youth involved to celebrate it was something that we wanted to highlight. And also the petition that she created around that event that's now going to the Senate to recognize Emancipation Day as a national holiday. And the thing that we thought that we could do that would best encapsulate this effort to sort of recognize Emancipation Day is bring people to a panel who are doing incredible work in their lives to continue the work of emancipation in our lives and around the world. So without anything else, I introduced to you Ngozi Paul, who also, she told me to say she's a yoga teacher as well with Modi Yoga. And so all of that to say, Ngozi, welcome. Thank you so much for helping us put this together. And with that, I am going to hand the mic over to you.
Thank you so much, Noelle. And she has disappeared from our view. Yeah, she did say that Noelle and I are dear friends, and I feel incredibly honored and happy to be here and be hosting this online conversation. And I will be leaning in. That's what I usually do when I'm there in person, and somehow getting closer to the screen makes me feel like I'm closer to all of you. I was just going to say, I started when I was 20. Ain't nobody's business how old I am. I could be 20 now. Before we jump into today's conversation, my freedom is your freedom. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which I sit and stand today, the indigenous land of the Anishinaabe, the Huron, and the Wendat here in Toronto, and just acknowledge the fact that our ancestors globally, we have people joining us from the United States, from Europe, we have people joining us from all around the world, and just acknowledging all of the people who came before us, and that we right now are always standing on sacred ground, no matter where we are or when we are. So I'm very happy to be here, and I acknowledge their presence. So we're starting My Freedom is Your Freedom in celebration of Peace Day and the intersection between peace and freedom and Emancipation Day. And when Noelle came and spoke to me about, having this panel and facilitating this conversation, I just want to add that September 21st is International Peace Day. And unlike all of the brilliant members of our panel today, I did not know that September 21st was International Peace Day. Similar thing happened to me with Emancipation Day a few years ago. Now, September 21st is also my birthday. And so I was like, how could it be that I've never heard of Peace Day? Similar thing happened with Emancipation Day a few years ago. And the name of my company is Emancipation Arts. And as Noelle mentioned, I wrote a play called Emancipation Was Lovely. And yet, as a Pan-Africanist, as a first-generation Canadian with parents from the Caribbean, as an Afro-Canadian, I had never heard of Emancipation Day. I'll just take a moment and let that sit. And it occurred to me, why do we celebrate the things that we celebrate? And how do we celebrate them? And went on sort of a quest. At that point, I vowed that every Emancipation Day, we would celebrate it, that Emancipation Arts would celebrate Emancipation Day. And we created Free Up, which is a youth-led festival, asking the question, what does freedom mean to you? And today we're asking the question, what does freedom mean to you? And what does peace mean to you? And Ala, one of the facilitators and organizers from the Welcome Collective, put it beautifully. And she said that, peace does not mean the absence of war. And emancipation does not mean the absence of slavery. So with that in mind, and interrogating what peace and what emancipation and freedom means in 2020, in the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of a global change and awakening and understanding of race and culture. We are starting the conversation with these incredible artists. So I will start by introducing our first panelist, Dua El Mardi. Dua El Mardi is a new Canadian, and she comes to us living in Montreal from Sudan. And technology. She's a global community organizer, an Atlas Core and Global Changemaker alumni. She's passionate about activating social transformation through art, education, and advocacy. She's a former employee of the Welcome Collective. They have some amazing people at the Welcome Collective, and currently works as an educator and engagement coordinator at Sustainable Concordia. She's a student at Concordia University, and she is studying economic development. She was also instrumental in putting together the Sudanese archives. And so that is Dua El Mardi. Our next panelist is Shanice Nicole. Shanice Nicole is a feminist educator, facilitator, a writer, and I love this, outspoken word artist. Her debut children's book, Dear Black Girls, published by Metani Press, is now available for pre-order, and she's also the curator of free community resources such as Jobs and Things. Very cool, subscribe. I spent quite a lot of time on there. The All Black Everything in Montreal, and the BFCN Scholarship Directory. Incredible, incredible resources that Shanice is making available to us. And she believes that everyone has the power to change and dreams of a freer world for all of us. And finally, we have Sadia Rafiquoddin. And she is an independent and freelance writer and photographer. She has covered Indigenous issues in Australia, Canada, the HIV and AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan and South Africa. Her work explores stories and issues impacting people of color, minorities, and those whose stories remain chronically underrepresented. Sadia has been recognized as one of Canada's most powerful women by the Women's Executive Network. She investigates and focuses on healthcare fraud, immigration policy, mental health for people in vulnerable communities and populations. Her journalism is grounded in insights gained and lived from the experience of a refugee from Pakistan and the subsequent challenges that her family experienced while settling in Canada. And over the COVID-19 pandemic, she has also been documenting the impact on Montreal's asylum seekers as a ground truth global migration reporting fellow. So join me in welcoming, we can't applaud, but I can wave my hands, our wonderful co-panelists today. So here we all are. I'm going to start off the conversation with just, it's almost a broad question, but in thinking about this moment, what does peace mean to you? And what does freedom mean to you? And let's start it off in the same way we started, Duha.
Sure. Thank you, Ngozi. It's very nice to be here with Shanice, Sadia, and everybody from Pop Montreal and Welcome Collective. Yeah, so peace and freedom, they're obviously very broad terms, right? And can mean so many different things to so many different people. But to me personally, as you said, and I really like that you said, you know, peace is not just the absence of war. And I really believe that it's not just the absence of war, but sometimes also the absence of situations that don't really fit in the category of war, you know? And these can be so many situations that a lot of people are living through. And peace to me really just means being able to live in safety and in security. And, you know, that is very essential, and to live in dignity, you know, with dignity as a human being. And freedom, I think, really means also to me to be able to explore the things that you love, to explore the things that elevate you, and to be able to even just walk in, with your body, like for me in my female body and with all the different intersectionalities of my identity, without having fear, of repercussions that could come just by being who you are. And I'd really, like to say that in Sudan, where I come from, my homeland, peace and freedom are are not, things that people necessarily, it's a part of their life every day. Unfortunately, that's not the situation. You may have to jump through hoops and hoops of systemic, as a woman, I'm speaking of systemic misogyny and systemic sexism every single day, just by, living in, not just from policing and from the state, but also just from society, living in a very patriarchal society. And at the same time, as is the reality here in the global north, racism and colorism is also a very huge part. A lot of people, I consider myself a very privileged person in Sudan, but I know that there are a lot of people in Sudan who go through racism every single day, from society again, and from the state, and from the policing and militarization of the country. So for me, that's what freedom is, and I think it's very important also to say that the root causes of these things, like being in Sudan and having to face these different aspects that are, that are basically giving you a lack of freedom and a lack of peace, and then moving here in the global north and facing a different context of lack of freedom and lack of peace because of different things. I think at the end of the day, it's also like the root causes of these things, whether they're in Sudan or whether they're here in Canada, is the same. It's the colonialism, it's the imperialism, it's the white supremacy. And so for me, peace and freedom means dismantling from white supremacy.
Yes, we're doing some dismantling from white supremacy. There's so many different things to unpack in that piece, in that conversation, in terms of root causes. And as we move through that same question with our other guests, I would also sort of like to sort of unravel and have a deeper understanding of, when we say racism, what do we mean? What is racism in 2020, in this moment in time? And then also, I will just say, and I don't know if this may not be a very popular idea, but I don't use the term white supremacy. I use the word like a white pathology, or some type of inferiority. I don't know what it is, but there's nothing supreme about the behaviors described when people are using the term white supremacy. And speaking of my own personal switch or deprogramming when it comes to that, I always just sort of like, I understand what the actual concept is, but I feel as though this sort of notion of colonialism and the brutal behaviors that have been inflicted on cultures around the world in the name of conquering an uber violence, and then the excuse for it, supremacy. I'm like, let's just cancel that. But that's just me. And ironically, I'm not a canceler, but I'm just like, try to flip it around. So just in the notion of unpacking that idea of racism and what we call white supremacy, what is that, and how does that show up today in 2020? And so I introduce Shanice next. And what does freedom mean to you? Just little light questions for a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, no big deal. No big deal. And adding on another light question to an already light question. I love that. Yeah, I feel like Duha's answer was brilliant. I don't know if there's much more we can add to it, but I think for me, an element that I would also include is thinking about like capacity for joy and pleasure. For me, is like really integral to that conversation and beyond kind of our conceptions of safety and security. As really what should be like, kind of the bare minimum for everybody, but really thinking about like how or what is the space for us to tap into joy and to pleasure. And for me, that's a really important part of freedom. Because even if you have like that safety and security, but you don't have that access to feeling good and to feeling whole and to feeling full, I think about like, you know, this life that we've been given, how are we able to live it to the fullness of that extent? So for me, that's just like a few pieces that I would add to Duha's brilliant answer. And of course, connected to that is choice. And so I feel like we could have a whole other panel on defining and talking about racism. So I don't want to like super get into it, but I think for me, that element of choice there is also really important in terms of racism, like any system of oppression, functions by virtue of, you know, an inequitable distribution of power and a total lack of choice, right? And so we're positioned in such a way where there isn't much choice because the systems are set up as they are, and then as individuals we navigate and perpetuate those systems accordingly. And I think another thing that's also important just in the conversation about racism is that it's also location based. And or more broadly, our conversations about race are location based. And so I think that's also important that we like complicate that conversation. And we often talk about race and racism from a very North American kind of perspective. And I think that is important that we understand like the global nature of this, you know, devastating. I mean, problem is not a big enough word to define it, but I think that's also really important is that we think about the global nature. And so for me, white supremacy and colonialism speaks to the global nature of how this violence happens and continues and is made into law, you know, as we've just seen with the announcement around Breonna Taylor's murders. And so we're working within systems that are set up and have been set up for a really long time. So dismantling them is as I like to say, it's going to take, we're not going to get to it over the weekend if we're talking about centuries and centuries of oppression and brutality. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Where to begin? Because I agree with you. There is a lot to unpack, and joy is my joy is my logo. So, but being able to access that again within the frameworks and the systems that exist. I just before we move on, Shanice, just because my sort of introduction to you and some of the work that you do is just the resources. You know, like if people want to read and educate themselves, I understand we don't have all the time to unpack it right now. Where are some good places to start?
Well, perhaps well, not really controversial, but I would actually say, as we saw really back in, you know, end of May and early June, there was like this mass call for resources and for reading lists and for books. And I would actually say to put the books down for a second, because we've been reading forever, for decades. People have been theorizing about racism and anti-racism and colonialism for longer than all of us have been alive. And for me, there's something really important there in terms of what is happening, or rather what needs to happen outside of the pages of books that are often written as scripts. And I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking for a checklist, and there is no checklist. And so I would actually say to like put down the reading list and to turn inwards into your body. One of the things that white supremacy teaches us is to be disconnected from our body, and more specifically to be like cut off from the neck. I always invite people to like actually touch their neck to feel it. And so what that means is we're taught to not feel anything below. And so we read, and we want to fill our head with these ideas and these theories and these understandings, but then we don't actually change. And so for me, there's like a huge, massive disconnect, and that also connects to the disconnection to the land. And so, and of course you can like, you know, learn more about this through reading, but I think there's something really important about how we have created this really one-dimensional idea of what learning looks like and how the change is going to happen. And I don't think it's going to be through a book.
Maybe through our bodies.
Absolutely, through our bodies.
That's why I told Noelle to make sure that she mentioned that I'm a yoga teacher. Learning comedic yoga. But really just tuning in. Oh, I love that answer. Thank you so much, Shanice. And Sadia, how would you respond to our first question?
I mean, I thought what both of our presenters said, was so eloquent and beautifully told. I would encapsulate it as saying, to me, freedom really is about, am I able to reach my full potential as a human being? Is my family able to? Is my community able to? Or is every person in our country have the socioeconomic opportunities to reach their full potential? To me, that is so crucial. Ensuring that every person has those opportunities is to me the core part of being free. We can be free of war, but if we go home and there's domestic violence, well, we're not really free. If you go out in your community and you're trying to get a job as a person of color, and you're confronted with racism, particularly in communities where others see that there is no systemic racism, then is that really being free? There are other, there are systems in place that keep people from being able to reach their full potential. And for me, that is number one. We have to be able to ensure that every person in this country is able to, in the world, has those opportunities. And without that, you're kind of always seeking that sense of freedom. And it keeps us from our joy. It keeps us from the moments that actually, I can even think of in my own life. I mean, I grew up in really difficult circumstances as a refugee. And when you're going through poverty and, daily life challenges, there is very little room for joy. Your joy is not, it's not a part of life. And, I can still think of moments that are rare from my childhood and from my adolescent years that really brought me joy, because it wasn't something that we could focus on. I mean, who has time for that when you've got, jobs to figure out and money to bring home and food to put on your table to feed 3 kids? Those are the things that keep us from truly enjoying life and being free. And so for me, it's really about are we able to reach our full potential as people?
And so the really incredible and important work that you do in journalism, how does the exploration of freedom and peace manifest itself in your expression, in the work that you do, in what drives you?
For me, it's I try and pick stories and projects where I see that there has been some kind of wrongdoing, or I can kind of get an inkling of wrongdoing. Often you don't know the entire arc of a story when you first start out, but there's always these instincts. For me, it's about not only choosing projects where I know there's some kind of systemic wrongdoing, something where we can hold a system accountable, but also I always think to myself, is this a story that I would otherwise see reported? If I don't do it, would somebody else do it? Is this a story about an idea, a concept, an individual, something that they're going through that's underreported? So I look at stories that I know may not be covered otherwise in the mainstream, and I choose stories about sometimes the most vulnerable people. Right now, I'm working on stories about Montreal's response to COVID-19 and how asylum seekers were very much caught and got sick at unprecedented rates. those are the most vulnerable people in this city at the epicenter of this crisis. And for me, that was really important when I went into the entire process of selecting a story and going through, because you put your heart into it. And I'm going to put my heart into something that I know is underreported, is not being talked about, is affecting the people who are the most vulnerable. How do we make sure their voices are heard? How do we make sure that they're being reflected in a country that doesn't necessarily support them in terms of getting their stories out in the media? We know how underrepresented people of color are. So how can I help bridge that gap? So those are some of the things that I'm always thinking about when I select projects and when I go through the storytelling process.
And it is very apparent in your body of work, which is really just incredibly moving and powerful. So I encourage all of the people listening to look up Sadia and the work that you've done. I just want to go a little bit further into that exploration of sort of allowing what we call underrepresented stories as a driving force. And I see that Shanice mentioned one of my favorite quotes by Toni Morrison in the chat, and we'll spend a little bit more time on the chat, which is that racism is a distraction. And this is out of memory, but the rest of it goes that it keeps us from doing our work. Somebody says that your head isn't shaped the right way, so you get scientists on that. Somebody says that, that you don't have any art and culture, so you dredge that up. There's one other one, I can't remember what it is. And then she says
language.
That you have no language. None of this is necessary. There'll always be one other thing. And I truly agree with that. And in this moment in time, an unprecedented moment in time, with this global awakening, emergence of the notion of dismantling systems, colonial systems, those ideas, and underrepresented stories, how do we represent those stories, bring them to light, use this moment, nurture this moment, but at the same time, find a way not to reinforce certain ideas that have been imposed on us. Now I'm just coming with all the easy ones today. I mean, these are the things that, sort of keep me up at night. So how do you approach that when balancing it, Sadia, and then moving into Shanice and Duha? Feel free to just jump in.
I mean, it's hard. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. But for me, I think it's really important to start from within ourselves. It's easy to go outside into the world and seek answers to these large concepts that are suddenly everybody's talking about, but those of us of color have been talking about forever and have known that they've existed forever. But I think we have to start with ourselves. We have to ask ourselves the hard questions. Are we going to be doing the work to actually focus in on the things that maybe everybody else wants to leave behind? Am I invested in telling stories that are underreported? If my editor comes back to me and says, no, I'm not going to cover this, am I going to put in the work to make sure that I get that story out? Am I going to put in the work to make sure that I pull together my own project? I figure out another way, so for me, that's really important. I know there are going to be barriers in place. That is the world I live in right now. It is not a perfect world yet. But am I going to do the work to help get those stories out and do whatever it takes to do that? For me, that's really important.
Shanice, Duha?
Duha, do you have anything kind of immediate to share? I'm still kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think some of what Sadia said speaks to me as well, you know, the stuff of like starting from yourself. I think, and I like that you, Ngozi, you phrased this question in like the exploration of freedom. Because for me, that's honestly, I think like I've only started exploring what freedom is and just beginning to understand what freedom is in probably the last 5-6 years, you know, because again, like living in Sudan, there is a long list of restrictions that come your way as a woman, you know, from your family, from society around you. This is what you're supposed to wear, this is how you're supposed to walk, this is where you're supposed to walk. Everything has its, you know, everything has its place. So that restricts not only in your behavior, but even in your heart and in your mind. You are restricted, you know, when all of these things are around you, you really become narrowed down with the things that you can, you know, think, and the things that you can do. So it's only, you know, it's still a very new work for me, just for the past 5-6 years. But I think that it manifests itself in my living, in my daily living, of just the process of trying to learn and trying to, you know, continuously explore what does it actually mean to be free, you know, and not just to be free as an individual, which is of course very important, but to also be free as a community, as a collective, you know. And I like it reminds me of one of Angela Davis's book, I think Freedom is a Constant Struggle, where she talks about how like we are in an era of collectivity and of hope within, like finding hope through community. And you know, she says it's in the collectivities that we find reservoirs of hope and optimism. And for me, that like really speaks. Like, I think, yeah, like to be free is something by yourself, but to be free collectively with a group or with a community is something that is even way more powerful. So I usually, you know, in the work that I do and in my life, I try to contribute to this path of freedom through, you know, collectives and movements. You know, the more the merrier, the bigger we are, the more impactful, the more important it is. um, but I think, again, like going back to how it manifests in my work specifically, my academic background is on environmental studies and disaster sciences, and I had a minor in nonprofit management in Sudan. So by nature, that kind of work already puts you, because we immediately had to start, like from day one in school, we had to start practicing the stuff that we're learning. So we had to, you know, be a part of nonprofits, be a part of local movements that are happening, collectives. So it was really kind of A, by the nature of my studies, and B, by the lived experience. It's a lot of people don't have, it's not a choice that they make, you know. A lot of youth in Sudan, they're not doing activism because they're bored and they don't have anything else to do. This is their life. You know, they have to take things, when the state fails you, when everything around you fails you, you have to take things by your own hands. You have to get down, you know, and do the work by yourself. And so that's kind of, for me, that's kind of where it comes from. um yeah, so I've done, you know, I've done this type of community work really in different capacities, depending on like what role I had at the time. But I've worked in community work in Malaysia, I've done community work in the United States, and all of these like kind of helped me in that journey of reshaping and sort of reframing what my idea of liberation is and what my idea of freedom is. And it was always really through people that I've learned. It was always through the people that I've worked with, the communities that I've worked with. They really, you know, gave me the big part of my learning. Yeah, and I'm still navigating that. It's a long process.
It's a, you know, it's the lifelong journey. You mentioned in one of our previous conversations that the artists and the activists were linked, especially in Sudan. And it was the artists and activists in terms of creating that expression to bring on revolution. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, like the regime that we've had, al-Bashir, the NCP regime, has been in Sudan since 1989. Before I was even born, they were already there. Um, so that's a whole generation. We're talking about 30 years. That's a whole generation of youth that are all born and brought up throughout that regime. So this kind of that feeling of, like, you know, the restrictions of freedom, the oppression and the repression that's happening creates a community. you know, because there's a community of artists who want to have their freedoms to do their work, but they can't because everything is controlled. And if your work is too political, you can't do it. If your work is too into women rights and feminism, you can't do it. There's too much of that. And then also the same thing, people who work in human rights and even basic humanitarian work at a period of time was considered something that is trouble. You're being a troublemaker. You know, you're exposing the state's failures by providing help to people who the government isn't helping. So that puts you in that category of a troublemaker. So then there comes that community of the artists and everyone who's basically trying to do something and it's considered not acceptable. They build a community around that. And so it was a very tight knit community of like, you'll see all of them, you know, all types of artists and people who work in human rights and so on. They're all doing the work that needs to be done in the country together. And we've seen that also in the revolution, in the Sudan revolution. I really always talk about something very important in the Sudan revolution, which is the the neighborhood resistance committees. These are committees that are comprised of youth in the neighborhood. They formed these committees. These committees basically took the job of like organizing people during the protest, telling people, you know, what's the route, where are we marching, how are we going, how to avoid police, things like that. But these were all, again, the same youth who were the artists and the human rights workers and you know, the youth from the neighborhood. All the oppression brought everyone together. And the revolution in Sudan is still ongoing. So the resistance committees are still working. They're using art, they're using everything they possibly can. Yeah.
Use everything. Really use everything. And the natural formation of community. Because we need each other in order to break through, whether it's an oppressive regime, whether it's the day-to-day structures in North America. We need each other as communities, whether it be, you know, artists, because it's like, I feel like we're not compartmentalized, right? It's not, hey, I'm a singer, and so I'm just an artist, you know, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a teacher. All of the things go together. We're all working in an ecosystem that is actually very much united, you know, and just bringing it back to the notion of peace or International Peace Day, which is supposed to be, was the UN called it, I think it was in 1982, that it was an International Day of Ceasefire and Nonviolence, right? And so, and I even think about, you know, what's going on upstairs or in our hearts, further to what Shanice was talking about, what's going on internally. Like, how many bullets are you shooting inwardly at yourself, whether it's self-criticism, whether it's self-loathing, you know, lack of worthiness, you know, like maybe you just need a day of peace for yourself internally. But also, how does that then reach out? You know, the Dalai Lama said there can be no peace without if there is no peace within. So how do we cultivate that ecosystem from internal work, and then how that reaches out and manifests itself in our daily lives? And I just like, there's just so much, this is such fertile ground. So Shanice, if you wanted to talk to how this work manifests itself in your own artistic expression and the work you do, it's really evident with all of our panelists. But if you wanted to speak to that, and then even touch on how the individual then connects to the community and what that ecosystem is and how to cultivate it.
Sure, yeah. So much fertile ground. Like, there's so many things that I want to talk about, and we don't have enough time, as always. I guess one thing that I'm just thinking about is like the sacredness of stories and storytelling. And I think it's so important that we continue to kind of cultivate space where people can share the stories that they have within themselves. I think about Maya Angelou, who speaks about that as well. And then, of course, understanding the real restrictions, as Duha was speaking to, about people's ability to actually, you know, speak those stories. But I think it's important that we challenge this idea that, like, we don't have our own stories, because we all do. And so how do we welcome that? And I think it's important in that conversation that we absolutely have to talk about power in terms of who gets to tell their stories and in which ways. And so one thing I'm just thinking about in relation to that is with my children's book, Dear Black Girls. And so it's been like, you know, several years of a process, and several years because I've just been slow and busy. But my mom, her ways of like pushing me to like get my shit together, we had this kind of ritual, if you will, where she would send me these beautiful, beautiful children's books with these beautiful Black characters. And we were always just like, oh, look at this beautiful illustration. And I would say 9 times out of 10, every single one of those books were written by white women. And so for me, that was a really good example of what happens when we push for diversity, and even when we push for inclusion, but we don't talk about power. And so what does it mean? And, you know, when we think about representation, does not mean liberation. So it's incredible that all of these Black and brown characters are now filling these pages, but it still remains that when we think about power and who's getting paid, who's getting money, the resources, the access, it still remains white people who are diversifying the characters and diversifying the stories that they already have permission and access to tell and to write and to share and to publish. So I just think that's a really important example of how we need to be critical and how we need to go beyond mere like diversification, but really thinking about the power structures that are in place that keep the systems in place, right? So I was just thinking about that kind of element, and again, that means allowing people to tell their own stories. And so I was really lucky to work with a publisher who, both of whom are white, but understood the importance of me leading, of me writing and curating the story in the way that I wanted to, and being able to choose an incredible illustrator who was able to bring that life and that vibrancy to the text. And I think it's just so important that we, again, really be critical about, you know, not just what stories are we reading or hearing or having access to, but like who's getting to tell them, and who's getting paid, who's getting the resources attached to it, and the support. So I just think that's like an important piece, especially for those who are like thinking about, you know, engaging in this work in deeper ways. Like we really need to go beyond the surface level. Like it's 2020. Like we can push ourselves, you know, to go further. And then your second kind of question about the individual in connection to the community, something that comes up for me in terms of the work that I'm doing right now around mutual aid and community fundraising feels really important. And so that I started in the end of 2018. It was like December 2018. And that's been really like, I'm consistently blown away. And so within the last probably about 18 months or so, as a community, we've been able to raise over $60,000 that has gone directly to Black and Indigenous people, primarily mothers, but not exclusively. And that's just cash with no strings attached. There's no application. People message me and they say that they need money for food or for clothing or for daycare or for medicine, or for whatever. And if the money is there, then they get the money right away. And I just think about what, for me, that just reveals like the power and the capacity that we all have. And I'm talking about people who, you know, once in a while will get like a big contribution, but I'm consistently getting, I think about this one person who sends me e-transfers of like $7 and $13 and $11, and really whatever they can, whenever they can. And for me, that always moves me a lot more than $100 or $200 contribution. And so for me, that also just reveals the people who are showing up for each other are the people who don't have a lot. But one of my mentors, Rachel Zellers, she says that there's a difference between not having anything and not having enough. And so I think about all of those people who are giving and sharing what they have, even if it is a little bit, even if it isn't enough, and how that is like literally changing people's lives. And so for, you know, everyone else, including, you know, those of us who might be on this call who do have more than enough and who do have excess, it's like, what would it look like for us to really reimagine our responsibility in co-creating a world where we are supporting each other, you know, beyond the structures of like governments and these institutions who don't actually care about people. And so I really think that we have a responsibility there, that I've just been able to see the direct impact of that. And so I really invite people to think about what you can do on a really like local level, because you can change people's lives.
So you're speaking my language so much. So Shanice, a couple of things. One, if someone wants to make a contribution, can you just say how they might be able to do that? Just speak it out loud. And then also, you touched on sort of what a personal passion of mine is again, how do we take these big ideas and activate them in our lives? You know, like how do we make this personal, right? And in a way, I heard it referred to as the black tax. Okay. Because what you mentioned in terms of your book, right, and receiving the book, but then the publishers or the writers were not people of color, you know, and it is wonderful. And it's not to say, at least in my opinion, I don't feel that they don't have the right to write that book. However, in terms of power and resources, and like you said, who's getting paid, when you go down that, when you start to like, you know, get a little bit deeper, as Maya Angelou says, then you actually see who's actually in charge, you know? And so I call that the black tax, because as a creator, that's actually why I'm a producer. That's why I became a producer, because I wanted to know who was behind these shenanigans, you know, when there was literally no people of color on television in Canada, nowhere, except for maybe like the sassy girlfriend just said, go get your man, girl. Like, you know, we other than that, there was, you know, nothing for me to do or say, you know. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to become a producer. And there is a weight to that, right? Because maybe all you want to do, you know, me, I've been like skipping down the street and dancing since I was a little girl. Maybe all I wanted to do was skip down the street, dance and giggle and whatever. But I had to become an executive producer too. So that's all to say, I know what my process is, but to all of you, how do you fortify yourself? What does day-to-day life look like in order to actually do this heavy lifting and move things forward? Like, what are for me, it's almost become a bit of a quote, but self-care, or the ritualizing of one's life in order to be able to sustain change. Shanice, Sadia, Duha.
Can I just jump in on some of the things that Shanice has mentioned? So much of what you said has touched me, because I think in journalism, in part, I had a whole other career in public health, and I transitioned into investigative reporting and telling the stories of underreported communities, because I got so tired of not seeing the stories that I was coming across reflected in the world. And, you know, I once went to, this is sort of a story of how I came around with telling my own story. I went to an editor at the CBC and said I wanted to tell stories about arranged marriages and forced engagements. And she was like, why do you want to do that? Why do you care so much about this? And I said, because I was in one, and I don't see this reflected in our media, but more so when they are told, they're told with this like sensationalism that doesn't need to be there. And I want to tell it in a much more authentic way. She said, why don't you do your own story? And I was like, no, I'm not telling my own story. I want to go out and find other people and tell other people's stories. Like, as a journalist, that's what I do. You don't focus on yourself, you focus on others. And, you know, I understood what she was saying. At the end of the day, what's important is it is telling your own story. It is reflecting on who you are and what has made you who you are. I would say that it was such a gift to be able to do that. But at the same time, like, I paid a big tax in order to do it. Going through the kind of like reliving through the trauma of telling a story that intimately was enormous. And I wish I could tell you that I have better ways of taking care of myself, but I love the work I do and I kind of absorb myself into it. And I really pick up on other people's emotions. It makes me a better reporter, but at the same time, it is something that I carry. It's something I have to be aware of a lot, but the price of not doing the work is bigger. And that's sort of what I lean on. I think, Shanice, what you've hit the nail on the head here with, looking at power structures and where is the power. I wanted to tell the stories of refugees because I was one. I know what it's like to have to cross borders and to be vulnerable, to see your parents experience that fear, to see my dad break down in a court hearing as a 6-year-old. That is one of my earliest memories, is seeing him break down in front of immigration officers. Those are the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell. And it's fine if somebody who is not a refugee tells them, but we should really be thinking clearly that there are so many asylum seekers and refugees in this world who have the power to do that. And what are the structures that is keeping them from doing that? Let's build those bridges, not keep them broken down or unbuilt. So that's sort of encompassing a lot of what you've talked about, but I wanted to hop in and really share that.
And I will say, that's Emancipation Arts. That's where we are focused on building those bridges and bringing these stories and highlighting them globally. And there is so much more to say. I do want to just take a moment to open it up to the audience to share your questions with us. I think we'll probably only have the opportunity to address one of them. But while I go through some of the comments that have been coming through, Shanice, did you want to add anything did you want to add anything?
I actually just want to share a quote, sort of like my favorite. So I just want to share a quote that I think is really, relevant and ties together everything that we've been talking about. It's falsely attributed to Lila Watson. So if anyone knows who is the correct attribution, I would love that. But she, well, not her. It is written that if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I think that is really so critical, right? In terms of us thinking about what is this work that we're doing, how high the stakes are, and the stakes are high because all of us are implicated, all of us are deserving. And so I think we really need to just reimagine what it means to serve and to be in relationship with each other and to really understand the responsibility and power that we all have as individuals and of course as a collective.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
We can't hear you.
I did what I said not to do. I couldn't feel more in alignment with what that quote that can you say it one more time? If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time.
But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together.
Right. And we definitely have our work cut out for us. That's for sure. What are the small things that we can do? This is a question from an audience member. What are the small things that we can do in our daily lives to initiate positive change? And if anybody doesn't want to just jump in right away, I will say for me, in terms of doing this work and creating space, really working towards ritualizing my own life, spending time in stillness, spending time in meditation. And, whether you believe in God or you're an atheist, but making your own life sacred. And I truly believe that making your own life sacred, spending time in mindfulness allows you the space to see others, to do the work, to fortify yourself, and go deeper. That's I want to continue to learn and expand and go deeper and get to know myself and question the way that I see things and research and just get a better understanding, and mirror that in my daily life. Shanice, Sadia, Duha, anything to that question?
Yeah,
What
I
small
can.
things can we do?
Yeah, I can. I just want to like give an example of something that it really helps me a lot doing this is showing up. Sometimes this is one thing that I think I struggled a lot with, between like when I made the shift to move here to the United States, and then here I did, the month of isolations that you have when you move to a new place, especially as an asylum seeker. You don't know a lot of people. It kind of really can put you in a mind state of isolation. But I've just found I started looking up for things that I can show up at. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to show up, whether it's a protest, whether it's a gathering, anything of the things that community things. I just started showing up without, sometimes I don't say anything. I just sit down and I listen to what people are saying and I listen to what this is about. And that helped me forming communities here and becoming a part of collectives, as I said. So I think sometimes showing up, and it can be in a different capacity, sometimes showing up doesn't have to be physically showing up. You could also be in a phone call, you could be in a Zoom call or whatever, but just showing up. I think it makes a lot of difference, and it makes a lot of difference to the people that you're showing up to.
Oh, I love that. Sadia, do you want to have a final comment? I know we're at 4. I hope they didn't turn us off.
I would say never be afraid of challenging the status quo. And that can be in the smallest ways. We can be having a conversation with a dear friend who says something that is inappropriate, that is plain and simple wrong. And having the courage to have those conversations with those closest with us to say, actually, I think that's not right. You shouldn't be talking like that. And that's particularly in the context of racism or the way our LGBTQ communities are still treated. Having those courageous conversations, whether it's with our next door neighbor or a family member or somebody else, in our own life, in our own sphere of influence, we can help shift perspectives, and that can be really powerful.
Yes. Shanice, thank you, Sadia.
Yeah, I had mentioned it earlier, but for me, my friend Janelle Kaspersky has taught me a lot about relationship, and that has just been central for me, in the past 6 months, I would say, and really just thinking about how we need to return to relationship, and whether that's with ourselves and our bodies, with the land, with each other, with those around us. I think we're just so out of relationship right now. And so when I think about, I don't have an answer for what you can do, but whatever ways that you can return to or be more in relationship with any of those things are things that we all need. So
yes,
yeah.
I love that. And that did kind of speak to a question that we had about what things we can do on a daily basis. Really returning to that relationship, really cultivating an inward practice of self-knowledge, and self-care and self-love. So I want to thank you all so much for spending this time today. I want to get up a weekly conversation about this, because as you said, there's so much to unpack, and it is a process, and we're always in the process of evolving and changing, and things to consider. Peace Day, what that means, walking through with peace and ease throughout our lives. Emancipation Day, I don't know. This is like a big education for me, but tomorrow is the Crown's speech, which is another very interesting thing. But That's what it's called. It's the Crown speech, and it's when the government announces what their plans are. And we're hoping and expecting that Emancipation Day will be recognized nationally at that point. And so we can all make sure that we just change the conversation by having a different conversation ourselves. And thank you so much, Welcome Collective, for the work that you do. And I see that the Welcome Collective as being, the embodiment of what an individual can do, what a community can do to actually open our arms and say who we are as people to newcomers and people who are most vulnerable and need our love and care and compassion, that we all exist within each other. So thank you so much. And in the spirit of closing and being here right now, anybody who knows me knows that I always like to end with a collective breath. So wherever you are watching from at home, whether it's this afternoon or sometime in the future or sometime in the past, take a moment, take a tall seat, feel your body, and we'll take 3 breaths together to close. You can close your eyes or keep them open as you choose. I like to close my eyes. We inhale. And exhale. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Pop Montreal. Thank you, Welcome Collective. Thank you, Sadia, Shanice, Duha. It's been a pleasure spending this afternoon with you. To be continued.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, everyone. Take good care.
You too.
Hey, Dre, just want to check in with you. It looks like you're still trying to connect to audio. Do you want to hop in the chat and let us know if everything's okay on your end?
Just so everyone knows, the Zoom link is linked to YouTube, and I'll go live at 4:30 exactly, and I'll let you know when we're live.
Hi. I think you might be muted.
Hey, Dre, I think everything's working for you. You just need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, on my end it says I'm Peggy. So
Right. Sorry, we have a small technical issue there. If you
oh,
don't,
okay.
do you know how to change your name yourself? If you go to the three dots in your upper right corner,
Okay.
it says rename.
Yeah, doing it. Happened.
Yay!
Yes. Okay. No, I wasn't having tech issues. I was just like easing my way into the vibe.
The Zoom vibe.
The Zoom vibe. I'm still new to Zoom. I'm like an old granny. I was like, how does this work? It's a whole thing.
That's great. I feel like I've just spent the last 6 months of my life on Zoom. So
Oh, you're a professional. I've been avoiding it at all costs.
that's good. Yeah, you're not missing anything.
Hi,
Tika.
Hey, babes. Okay, wait. Why does it say that my name is Peggy Hogan?
I had the same issue. I just learned how to change it. Three
Okay.
dots top right of your, what is it? Of your box?
Hold on.
Yeah, three dots on the top right.
Yeah.
And then
I-
favorite name.
Okay, so rename. Okay.
I kind of like that we all might be
We're all
Hogan
Peggy.
today. Yeah.
I'm so
I'm
sorry
fine with
that I'm
that.
late, guys. Are we adding our pronouns? I put my
I
pronouns.
guess that's optional.
Oh, okay.
I could add mine back.
Okay. Erin, your hair looks so cute. Everyone's hair looks so cute.
It was a lot for a while, but because I see all my clients on Zoom and people are like regularly seeing my like pandemic hair, I had to get it cut.
Oh my God. Hi, honey. It's so good to see you.
Oh yeah, maybe I'll put my pronouns back in.
Yeah.
Hey, Rebecca, can you do me a big favor and throw the... Oh, there's Shoshana. Never mind. Never mind.
I love that we all have plants in the background. Like our BF.
This is my special hanging baby.
This is Sheila.
Oh, Sheila.
Hey,
She has a
Let me
name.
love you till the morning. That's literally why I named her that.
That's amazing. So when we go
Yeah.
around and introduce ourselves, like feel free to introduce Sheila.
Oh yeah, she's all in the mix.
Erin, just a quick question. Did you want me to do the land acknowledgement or would you prefer to do
Oh,
that?
I would love that. Thank you. Yeah, I was not prepared in my brain to do that.
It's all right. Erin, your hair looks so cute. I love this cut.
Thank you. I'm like back to being 7 with my bowl cut that I had at that time in my life.
I'm dead.
My brother and I had matching bowl cuts.
Really?
Yeah, we look like twins.
Okay. Bowl cut.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Shoshona here. I'm just having some technical difficulties, but I feel like it's all getting resolved.
We can
You guys can't
hear you.
Yeah, it's okay. I feel like I have somebody helping me and it's getting fixed.
Welcome, Shoshana.
Thank you so much, Chimigwech.
Tika, it's great to see you.
Hi, babes. Pegs, I'm so sorry about your dad.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm taking it day by day.
Okay. Do you want to come by for a dinner soon?
I would love that. We're very close neighbors.
Yeah.
I just got back to Montreal, so yeah, I would super.
Oh, did you? Were you where? Were you away for a while?
I was gone all summer. I was at my dad's bedside and then just hanging out with my mom afterwards. So it was nice to have that space. We can be so performative in like performer world.
Yeah,
artist circle world. So it's nice to have the space away. But I want like nice intimate one-on-one hangs now that I'm back in the city. It would be.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to see if you were ready, but if you are, then come on by.
Wow. Okay, we're going live in 1 minute. Shoshana, you will not appear on the YouTube live unless your video is active.
I'm trying. Hang on,
Okay.
give me 3 seconds.
I'm just gonna plug in my headphones. I'm copying.
Ah, did it.
Perfect timing.
So we're live. I'll ask that everyone turn their microphone off for 1 minute and then we'll get started.
Okay.
Welcome everyone to this special hybrid edition of Pop Symposium. It is the first day and we are delighted to have you joining us here on Zoom. My name is Peggy Hogan. I am Symposium Director this year. I'm very, very honored to be presenting this amongst other fabulous panel discussions this year. And I just wanted to start with a quick land acknowledgement before I hand it off to our fabulous moderator, Erin Fogel. So I just want to start by saying that we at Pop Montreal would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the unceded lands of Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. Pop Montreal urges everyone who attends our events to become informed and involved in anti-colonial work and Indigenous-led struggles and resistance wherever you live. We would also like to acknowledge the solidarity that exists between Indigenous resilience and Black liberation struggles, and that working towards decolonization also includes supporting Black lives and Black liberation. So with that, I will hand it off to Erin Fogel.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm really excited to be here. I guess I'll introduce myself first since I'm moderating, and then I'd love to go around and ask every beautiful person on our panel to introduce and share a little bit about themselves. So my name is Erin. I am the artistic director for a Toronto-based music festival and show series called Venus Fest. We work with underrepresented artists in the music industry. We have some programming coming up online next week too. It should be pretty fun. As well as Venus Fest, I'm also a musician. I play in a project called Queen of Swords. And I have almost 10-year history working with clients in the healing arts. I do astrology readings, karmic core pattern readings, which are looking at people's repetitive life patterns that they experience, as well as tarot and energy work. So this panel is something that is deeply personal and meaningful to me in both realms, spirituality as well as activism. So I'm really excited and honored to be sharing this with everyone. So I'd love to go around maybe popcorn style and everyone can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your work, both as artists in your work there, as well as in terms of your personal activism and the spiritual foundation of your experience.
I guess I'll go first.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dre Ngozi. I'm a DJ, music producer, music curator, general artist, holistic health practitioner. I'm an acupuncturist and shiatsu therapist. I just do everything. My spiritual practice started, I guess, from birth, but really went to another level around 18 and started to study Buddhism and other forms of spiritual practice and religions. Again, also always been an artist from birth as well. And I'm a bit of a rambler. So that's like the gist of me.
Okay, so I think I'll go next. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, no? Okay, good. Okay, I'm Tika. I am a singer-songwriter, a film composer, and a musician, as well as a tarot card reader And similarly to Dre, my foundation previously in spirituality was actually in Christianity before I became a practicing Buddhist. And so now I do quite a bit of meditations, and yeah, I incorporate a lot of like my meditation and my healing practices into my score work and into my soundscapes that I create. So there's a lot of you know, meditative and interesting sounds in my work. And yeah, I like to, um, I think that my purpose is in creating like social change through art in different ways, whether that be by filmmaking or, you know, creating scores or making music. It's all in the greater good of creating social change.
Anin bojo jaushko beneze kwe desnakas and megazido dem Bachuana and Donjaba Ojibwe Anishinaabe. My name is Shoshona Kish, and I am Eagle Clan from a beautiful place on the shores of Lake Superior called Bachuana. And I'm an artist and an organizer and an activist. And I work with my husband primarily, like my day job is being a musician. With my husband, we have a band called Digging Roots. And then I moonlight as an organizer, although I'm not moonlighting. It's sort of flipped since this whole pandemic thing happened, and I'm home all the time and not out on the road playing. And but I am the founder and producer of the International Indigenous Music Summit with my brilliant partner Amanda Rayum, who's also an artist and activist. We wanted to host a space for Indigenous voices to come together and just figure out how we can amplify each other and support each other and build on this momentum that's happening with Indigenous music, because I genuinely know that the Indigenous narratives are important for all of us. And I know that because I was brought up in my tradition. My family is Three Fires Midewan Society, and I feel really lucky to have that foundation to my worldview and also my spirituality. So the summit really holds space for the intersection of that wholeness for us as Indigenous people and artists and spiritual beings and yeah, human beings together. So that's been this really wonderful journey that we're on, and it's a little bit of a secret right now, but I'll tell you guys that Amanda and I are also launching a label for Indigenous and BIPOC voices with a focus on women, or Women X, LGBTQ communities, just in that same theme of really wanting to amplify and make, disrupt and make cracks in the system to allow new things to emerge and to allow those voices that have been silenced to be heard. And not as simply an exercise in equity and social justice, but because we believe that the path forward requires all of those beautiful voices at the table. Yeah, and we also, Amanda and I founded an organization called The Stronghold, and it's meant to hold space for that intersection between art and spirituality and activism. So it's a vehicle for us to show up for each other as artists and our respective communities.
That's beautiful. I'm so excited to just watch that unfold, that new initiative. That sounds amazing. I'm going to operate on the assumption that most people watching this panel probably have a pretty good sense of what activism is, because I find that while obviously that can look really different for many people, that as groups and collectives, we tend to have a more unified understanding of what activism means versus what spirituality means, which is often something that can be completely unique from person to person. So I'd love to just hear, what spirituality looks like for you, what that means for you in your day-to-day experience, and how that's kind of held you as a person.
Okay, I think I can start. It's interesting. Like, I mean, when I first started my spiritual journey, I would say it was approximately 5 years ago. Prior to that, I was a pretty devout Pentecostal Christian, and I went to church like every Sunday from my youth with my family. And then I started exploring my spiritual side a lot more, actually, after a sexual assault. And it joggled my memory and my mind, and I needed to recalibrate and get myself back to a space of neutral and alkaline, and didn't really know how to do it outside of regular prayer. And so a lot of meditation, taking time with myself, kind of treating myself with a lot more compassion and more kindness, operating on a less colonial frequency, slower patternings, and, kind of removing myself from systems of like oppression were really important for me to just come back. I really didn't know what that process was essentially going to look like, but it involved a great deal of exploration of different modes of spirituality. So Buddhism was great for me because it helped me to calm my temper. And I think that like one of the difficulties of like coming back after an assault is like I felt a great deal of vengeance for a very long time and didn't know how to. Um, I just didn't know how to like disconnect from that particular idiosyncrasy, because I knew it wasn't conducive to my personality in the slightest. But I knew that in order to get rid of it, it was going to take like some more work, deeper work than just like going to a church and laying it all down at the altar, right? So yeah, that kind of like started my practice. And then tarot was introduced, I would say, like maybe about 4 years ago, as I don't like inundating people with my problems. So it was like, okay, like I feel like I can find the answers within myself, and within myself and goddess or God. Um, and yeah, so tarot was a great way for me to trust my own inner voice. Um, and then uh, yeah, now it's interesting. Like now it's more Reiki, and shamanic Reiki specifically is something that I've explored more of, that I really enjoy and love. Like it's so necessary. And any form of like alternative medicine or healing is, something that I'm really really open to and interested in. And hopefully this year, like fingers crossed, will be my year to explore ayahuasca. But yeah, my spirituality is pretty quite vast, I would say, and also like having the, being a Black woman, and coming from a family that's predominantly Christian, and deconstructing a lot of those religions that don't exactly uh, that I feel pertain to my found necessary, and help me to awaken to the realities of a lot of things. So yeah, spiritual journey is fun. I think it's so important to explore, to just explore and find what works for you, what works for your personality.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's even just a really interesting point to notice the difference in history and context for religion and spirituality, because for some people, those two things might be really similar or one and the same. And for a lot of people, they're not, especially depending on their own lineage and their own personal history.
Yeah, for sure. Like I definitely feel that uh, Pentecostal Christianity was way too rigid and way too strict for my personality and didn't give me a lot of freedom to ask questions or to explore my queerness or to, explore at all. It was too rigid for me, you know what I mean? But I understand the boundaries and I understand why people keep themselves in these boxes because it might be too perhaps a little bit too uh, scary to discover that there might be a different answer outside of the constructs of the box that you're comfortable with. Um, but for me, like in Sunday school, I was the kid that was like, hey, what happened to the fish if Noah had the ark? Like, were they all dead? Like, I'm confused. Like, I was that kid. Like, I was like, this sounds like fraudulent. Like, I was that girl. So, I feel like exploration and just discovery, self-discovery is so important. And because we're decolonizing and actively like trying our best to um not necessarily work under systems of oppression or like white supremacy, now it's becoming a lot more clear as to some of the regiments of organized religion and why they're put in place in the ways that they are. But I just think that freedom of expression, asking questions is necessary.
Guess I'll go next. Just to kind of go off of what Tika, you just shared. I went to Catholic school my whole life and most of my family is Christian. So I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of asking questions, and the answers just never made sense to me at all. And so that's when I started to explore Buddhism because I'm like, because it resonated with me more and allowed space to, the biggest word for me is questioning. And that for me, that's what spirituality is, always asking more. Why is that? How do I change that? What can I do about it? What does it mean? And what's the journey? What are the tools that I can use to dismantle the parts of myself that aren't sitting well? Does that make sense? I don't know. And so I started that journey I'd say very young compared to a lot of people. And it's what I've learned at this age. I'm 35. I started at around 16 to 18. It is a continuous journey. You can get to a point where you think you get it and you think you know it. And then life comes and it's like, nah, girl, I got another chapter. I got a few more chapters for you. You know what I mean? It's never ending. But I think it's a very difficult journey. I think real intense spiritual work is really hard. It's not airy fairy. It's not just, burning things and singing bowls. It's like really dark and deep and lonely and sad and miserable and crying endless nights and losing yourself and finding yourself. It's an endless cycle. And it does take a lot of, I'd say a lot of courage to even start that process and learning to be uncomfortable, because it's very uncomfortable. And I think that's the whole point for me is what spirituality is again, dismantling the ego-based mechanisms in your being, because how else are you supposed to be a better person in the world outside of yourself? Do you know what I mean? If we're talking about spirituality and activism, it's like, okay, activism, we're trying to address the toxicity in society, but we also need to address the toxicity within ourselves first, because society is made up of individuals. So then if you don't, you're literally going to repeat the same toxic patterns, whether you could be fighting for a cause externally, but not doing the work internally and actually replicating the same thing you're fighting for in your immediate surrounding, in your interpersonal relationships, in your intimate relationships. How is that any better? I'm going on a rant now, but I hope people understand what I mean. The point is that they're both very much interconnected. Spirituality, activism are, to me, go hand in hand, again, because it's causing us to think about the microcosm of life, as well as the macrocosm and the ripple effects and the domino effects of things. And we need to really understand that in order for real change to happen, or else we're just running around in a circle and you know, just repeating the same things. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Like, I think that is why they can be so powerfully interconnected, is that spirituality offers us an opportunity to keep crossing a personal threshold over and over and over again. That is really uncomfortable and is like a death of our sense of self over and over, and a discovery of our blind spots and our unconsciousness and things that we want to unlearn. And if we're doing that work as artists and as activists, then we are bringing that into our work in the world, rather than bringing those unconscious pieces or those blind spots into the work.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with Dre too. Sorry, Shosh. Sorry.
All good. I think it's really, it's actually lovely to be sharing space with you guys, because, or you gals, because we always just feel like there's that inherent sense of respect where we're not just going to, like, you know, jump in and everybody's waiting for everyone else to find space. And I think it's lovely, and not always the case. Yeah, I feel like, you know, my relationship to creation, my own spiritual practice, is a very personal one for me. And it's interesting, I actually really excited to have this opportunity to talk about it. But I think that from an Indigenous perspective, from an Anishinaabe perspective, we all have the right to know who we are. And part of knowing who we are is knowing our teachings, knowing our land, knowing our clan, knowing our name, which for us, there's a tradition that names come through. A name has to be given, and from a person who gives names. And these are gifts that we have the right to. And I think, you know, the Indigenous experience is so much for my generation, and I absolutely for those before and those still coming. This is like the spiritual journey is one of reclamation. Knowing our name is act of resistance and reclamation. You know, knowing our clan, which is the foundation of our traditional governance system, is an act of resistance and reclamation. And so, you know, when I was talking about feeling very privileged to have been brought up by a matriarch who was very much entrenched in the traditional way of seeing the world and way of walking through this world, that isn't a common experience, and we are still actively as a family engaging that work. So I think it's interesting I think it's a different perspective in a certain way to be standing only it's just like, you know, it's just like looking at the world from slightly different angles, because I'm not searching for something other than what I was given. I'm searching for that which has been sort of ceded to me and is my lineage. And that's an ongoing journey, because I think, as we know, there's been such a disruption in the transmission of these gifts and teachings, and they aren't, as they are meant to be, part of everyday life. But from an Anishinaabe perspective, spirituality is integrative. It's not something that you do sometimes. It's not one of many things in your life, and it's not something that you step into and out of. It is directly connected to your sense of identity. This is a traditional Anishinaabe Medewan perspective. It is who you are. And so the journey is to those teachings that were given. The teaching is that they were given to us by the Creator and intended for us. We have not borrowed it from somewhere else. We haven't discovered it. It is central and land-based. So all of those ceremonies and teachings and all of that stuff are here in the land. And I think that calls some interesting discussion about how we share our custodial relationships to this land and our relationships to one another. Does that make any sense? I don't know.
To me, absolutely. I mean, I think you bring up a really powerful point that connects to something that I was going to ask about a little later, but I mean, it feels so relevant to what you're saying that I'd love to touch on it now. I think a lot about how our sort of current cultural climate is viewing our experience through colonized white supremacist lens. And before colonization, exactly like you're saying, Shoshona, spirituality was a celebrated foundation to life, especially for many Black and Indigenous communities. So I'm interested to talk about the way that colonialism and white supremacy have impacted our cultural perception of spirituality, as well as our ability to sometimes connect with it or connect with our own personal sense of divinity or our sense of connection to one another as communities.
Well, I think it's interesting that both Tika and I had a similar, like, maybe possible upbringing, that we were raised in these more Christian households, and it wasn't right, and because it's not actually ours, and that we both sought something else that resonated more, and it just so happened to be Buddhism. But it's because, as we all know, the history of the transatlantic slave trade, everything was ripped from Black people, like language, religion, all spiritual practices. So many of us of the diaspora don't know. We don't know what those traditional practices necessarily are. And even I find if you talk about it my mom's Caribbean, even if you talk about those practices, they're seen as like devil practices, and it's shamed immediately. And if there's any problems at all, go and pray, read the Bible, and be quiet. Like, you know what I mean? And it's very disheartening that you already know. and
yeah,
so
we call it obia.
That's it. You call it obia. And so when Shoshana, you're talking about this reclamation, and I find that so I find that so beautiful, and there's a part of me that wishes we had that ability to do that with not necessarily ease, but even just the ability to do that. Sometimes it's just such a struggle, and the fact that it still is, that much of our family do still refer to it as obia and devil stuff. If I sit and meditate, my family think it's weird, like when I'm just centering myself. And they might not even know what our African practices or spiritual practices even are, because it's so far removed. It's all like hypothetical, maybe, kind of, do you know what I mean? Lost my train of thought, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that I'm so glad that you brought that up. And you know, that experience of being ripped from tradition and family and language and culture is something that's very familiar to us. And I feel like very moved. Like, thank you for sharing that, because I do think it's an experience that Black and Indigenous people share in some ways uniquely. I mean, obviously there are people from all over who have a sense of disenfranchisement from their own lineage, but there is a profound collective experience that we've had. And it's interesting. I was just revisiting some teachings in my mind from an elder, and he was saying to this group of young people that he was reminding of these young people that though the colonizer has tried to steal our language, and though the colonizer has tried to take our culture, and though the colonizer has tried to literally take our lives, that we are still here. And because we are still here, those teachings are still here, those words are still here, and you are proof of it. And those things, they are in our blood. They are in our mother's blood. They are in our grandmother's blood. And as long as we are on that road of seeking, I believe that we will be a part of bringing those things back.
Dago made me cry for real.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think that's why, again, Tika, we sought something else, because it is running in our blood. It is running in our veins. We feel it. We felt it like viscerally, and reaching out and trying to find something else. So you're so right about that. And even in having these conversations and challenging the oppressive frameworks that we were given is part of it. Like, it might not have been conversations the previous generation had necessarily. And so we are trying to do the work. And again, coming down to questioning and dismantling. And yeah.
Yeah, totally, totally. You know, it's so interesting because like, I mean, my family is so traumatized in so many different ways, and really struggling with a lot of things. And when I do think about my parents and their well, actually, particularly my mother. My mother is way more closed-minded than my father. My father is a lot more progressive and way more open-minded, I would say, than my mom is. But when I think about my mom and all the things that she had to really go through, you know, I get it. You know, to me, you know, here's a woman who's a single parent, 3 children, and it's so interesting. Like my grandparents were, uh, I think they came to Canada in the 1950s. And my grandmother was a librarian at Arundel College in Mississauga, and my grandfather was a carpenter for the city of Toronto. And so they're builders and educators, builders, educator, builder, educator. And so I kind of came up in this way of learning all the time and being progressive. And my grandmother didn't really have the affordability or the time to provide my mother with any nurture. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, as a result of that, like my mom was a real narcissist to me, which I would like to think or challenge, that narcissism to me is just like layers and layers of unresolved trauma. And so, you know, she's still kind of in that space. And so when I would ask her questions about spirituality, or when I would pose questions about things that I was interested in, it would always be met with like anger or disdain or frustration. And, you know, for a while I thought it was me. Like I was like, oh, like, you know, maybe I'm asking like really invalid questions, or maybe I shouldn't ask anything at all. And so for a while I thought that asking questions was equatable to something bad, you know. And so it wasn't until I moved out of the house and realized like how sheltered that I actually was, and how oppressive my home life actually was. I realized like, oh, like there's a whole world of you know, spirituality to be able to explore, to help me to get back in touch with the self. You know what I'm saying? And so when I really look back now in hindsight on the ways in which I was raised, super problematic, extraordinarily oppressive, like undeniably abusive in so many different ways, and whether it be emotional, physical, whatever. And I just knew that I didn't want to operate on that frequency. And it took me a while to know that that wasn't like a normality either. You know what I'm saying? Because I was so accustomed to this behavior. So spirituality, reading books from Eckhart Tolle and like Not Thich Nhat, like, I mean, like really, really helped me to understand like foundational principles that I wasn't privileged to learn or know. And once I got into having like a basic framework, I realized that I would have to go back in and rebuild, like, and start from ground zero, because this lifestyle wasn't conducive to the way that I want to live. And if I do decide to have children one day, it's not the way that I want to rear, or even the term rear. Like, I just like, I don't, I don't even want to be that kind of a parent. So it's like, you know, I think that being able to have the freedom to destroy and rebuild constantly is really a privilege. And, you know, it took me a long time to even get to a place where I wasn't so like resentful or bitter about the way that I was raised, or, you know what I mean? Like the situation that I was put in, because I felt so denied for such a long time of the truth, like so denied. But I'm like, they don't even know themselves, right? So like, thank God I'm here. And like, thank God is that I'm able to, you know, rebuild myself in a way where I can learn and grow and be expressive and progressive. Like, you know, it's an exciting time, you know, but also it's like, I think the saddest thing, it's like realizing that you can't take everybody with you. It's like not everyone is down for the ride. You know what I mean? And that for me is like the hardest part, because there's been such a joy in my self-discovery. And I like, I'm the kind of person like, well, everybody to know. Like I'm just, yo, you need to learn about this, like, you know, but not everyone is open. And yeah, that's kind of the hardest part for me. It's that it's a really personal, it's a personal journey. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that you raise a really good point that even just having the emotional, psychological space to do spiritual work is a privilege in and of itself. And for a lot of us, especially, you know, in our own lives and also in the lives of the generations before us and our families, people were focused on their survival needs. And, you know, when survival is the most important focus, we don't always have the space or the privilege to be able to open to more, or to go through a deep process and to work with things in that way. So it is certainly its own kind of privilege. I want to talk about some of the challenges, but also the mutual benefit between these two spheres of spirituality and activism. Certainly for myself, and I'd love to hear from all of you what your experience has been. In the spiritual communities that I've been connected to, I've seen a lot of spiritual bypassing, which from my perspective is like an aversion to really acknowledging suffering. Like it can be so painful to just come to terms with how much suffering there is on the planet. And I find that spiritual bypassing is like a kind of avoidance that allows people to disconnect or not really see what they're seeing. On the other hand, I find that often in activist circles, there can also be an avoidance of spirituality and of that kind of bigger context, probably out of a history of witnessing spiritual bypassing and some of the harm that can come from that kind of disconnect. So I'd be interested to hear from you where you've seen sort of challenges in these two spheres of your life, but also the way that those two can really remedy each other. Because as much as those challenges exist, I think that activism can offer a lot of grounding and connectivity for our spiritual practice, and spirituality can offer hope and meaning in a bigger context with our activism.
I think from my perspective, you know, activism is like almost like an extension of spirituality. It's like, I'm not going to show up for anything unless my spirit tells me I need to be there, and unless I believe that spirit work to show up. And that's just me. I'm not prescribing anything by any means, but I do, from my experience and perspective, they are inextricably tied. And I think that, you know, there's been some visibility of Indigenous movements. Certainly the stuff that we saw at Standing Rock, or any number of activations that have happened. Those things are happening all the time. Like right now there are, you know, blockades set up in a number of places, really serious things happening, people getting arrested, there's just like really serious stuff happening at all times. But I think that that the land back movement has spirituality at its center fire. And so I think it's a great example of understanding how that spirit work and being guided by spirit to show up, as, you know, understanding it's your responsibility to do so, is for me sort of, it's common practice in terms of Indigenous activism to have spirituality as, just like in part of what's happening, because it's part of what's happening when we gather and when we move together all the time, whether we know it or not. And I think that, you know, I'm not sure about spiritual bypassing. I don't really know about that, but I do know that, you know, because religion is our key access point often to spirituality, that's what we're taught, that's what's, you know, sort of made available to us. It's sort of the common practice of Western culture. And I think often activism requires to be moving against colonial systems, which religion is. Religion is an arm of colonialism. It has been used that way for as long back as history tells it. So I think often there is an internal conflict to have those things present. And when that conflict is somehow resolved, and because I know that the church is not absent from social justice movements, but, you know, like, I think that there is an internal conflict there that needs to be reconciled, and create, you know, something that's worth us interrogating for ourselves, you know, depending on where we come to our spirituality.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the spiritual bypassing thing is definitely a real thing, I would say, in the social media world. You're always seeing people fling up a live life, love, laugh, light, you know what I mean? But not actually doing the work. But I think that it's like, you know, it's the idea of spirituality without actually doing the thing. You know what I mean? It's the idea of it. It's just like what Dre was saying. Like, spirituality is not some, it's really not some kumbaya shit. It's really dirty and like gross and like bawling and purging. It's not cute at all. It's actually quite gross and super ugly. But I mean, I think for the most part, the difficulty in, like, how can I say? I feel like the difficulty of like, the duality between like the social media realm, specifically, and like, you know, young people being able to learn from like an older generation. Like right now, I love like Sonia Renee Taylor for like being so open about her process. You know, like crying on camera, like all of these things. I think like on a personal level, like it's like my politics won't allow me to. I don't believe in showing my discomfort in front of the oppressor. Like, that's my personal politics. And so like when I deconstruct with my people, like comfortably, like at home, like, you know what I'm saying, like with my people down the street, like it's like the tears, the crying, and whatnot. But I do have a great deal of discomfort, allowing like the oppressor to see my pain, because it's always used as a method or a modality of like, you know, entertainment. So I just, you know, there's a weird dichotomy to kind of reconcile with that, because on one hand it's like I would like to be real for my people, but then on the other hand it's like I'm not interested in having Tom, Dick, and Harry gawk at my, you know, experiences, in an effort to use it against me in some form or fashion. So I like conversations that are privately put together similarly to this, because I feel like it's more contained. And I feel like, you know, the right people are seeing this and it feels more comfortable and more safe. And, you know, it's more real to me rather than like sitting on like Instagram live and having like a random person just kind of like float by. That's not like the most comforting thing. So when it comes to like the idea of like spiritual bypassing, again, I feel like it's a personal, your spirituality is a personal journey. And yeah, those who are in my life are privileged enough to see that and to know me and to know what it is to go through that pain. But I also think that there's a great deal of folks that are uh, living in the online world and perpetuating a narrative and a like a convoluted ideology around the idea of spirituality and making it seem that they're actually doing the work when they're literally sitting on Instagram 24 hours a day and they're not doing anything. You know what I'm saying? So like that, I think that's like my idea of like spiritual bypassing is like more related to like social media, because I've seen a lot of those like, you know what I mean? Like the whole, like the Rob Hill Senior, like this is what you need to do to stay in a relationship, blah, blah, blah. But behind the scenes, ain't nothing going on but the rent. Like I feel you. Like it's like
Yeah, or like wearing a t-shirt that says witch without having any connection to that tradition. So
like, are you even present?
yeah.
I wasn't sure if I could even really answer this question because if you know me personally, I'm basically a loner. Like I don't really do groups. I'm not part of any group or Tika, like you can't usually find me. Like I'm in my own world.
I tried a group. I left the group. I ain't going back in no group.
I've always been, yeah, I feel you. I've always been a very independent person and like kind of keep to myself and gone through my own journeys by myself. But maybe because I'm also a health practitioner, I do a lot of one-on-ones, and that's how I feel like I can contribute to someone else's life or make whatever little shifts or inspire in whatever way. I have a weird relationship with social media. I definitely have battled with it for a while, and I've tried to put more personal things about myself and my own, and paying attention to the feedback that I get from people. So I sometimes weigh out the pros and cons. Is me sharing this little bit about what I've learned, if it can inspire even 5 people, that's enough for me. And going back to what I was saying earlier it's about individuals, because individuals are what make up institutions and organizations and systems. It's a ripple effect. So the more people I can even influence on an individual level, on a micro level, will hopefully eventually, you know what I mean, like evaporate up and spread out and because I don't know who they're at home with. Like their dad could be the CEO of whatever, but maybe a conversation or maybe something I posted might have sparked a thought, whatever, that they may have a different conversation with that person in their household. That person I could never reach. I don't know Jim who works for, I don't know him, but I talked to his daughter, or his daughter resonated with something that I said. And that's the work that I can do. I may not always be, I have, been to marches. I have protested several times. I've been on the front line. And this is something I think about all the time, is that being an activist, there's a spectrum, and to not always feel guilty about how obvious your activism is, if that makes sense. I think there's a role for everybody. I think it definitely is a space and needed for people to be on the front line. Absolutely. And there also is room for people to be on the other end, not the other end, but another side of that, in my sense, because it's a very traumatic experience. The work that frontline people do, it's very traumatic. The work that activists do, it's a lot. But how do we heal at the same time? Because like we're saying, if the trauma doesn't get worked through in the work, vicious cycle happens. So I ask this every day to myself, like, how do we do both and make space for both, and have it not swing to these extreme pendulum? You know what I mean? Spirituality is about being, and activism is about doing, and both are necessary, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's great. And I think it's really interesting. The most badass sort of deeply committed activists that I know and look up to don't have time for social media. They just don't. And I think activism for me is really about what we're doing when nobody's watching, like, especially as somebody who has a public life and presence. Social media is not my friend. It's not how I interact with the world, really. I mean, I love elements of it, but I'm not inclined to put my personal life on the internet. And I'm also not inclined to me, my activism is, it's not that it's personal and private, but it's not a marketing tool, and so I don't feel comfortable often posting those things unless it's purposeful in some way. And that is not a criticism of anyone else. I actually feel like my sister is one of those really badass activists, and her social medias are like the most engaged, most beautiful, most best social medias ever. Can I call them social medias? And I love what she does because she's inspiring people and she's engaging in a way that's really productive. But I don't find that space that way. And so I'm really curious about this spiritual bypassing. Like, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it because it's the first time I'm hearing this term, and I'm super curious to explore that a little bit further. Maybe not on this call, because we only get a little window to talk about really huge things, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find it to be a really important part of this conversation, but that might also be based on like my personal experience and my history of really witnessing a lot of it. I found that spiritual bypassing comes in the form of sometimes people looking at suffering and saying that might be because of your own unhealed stuff, or to say, oh, well, you're in a depression right now because you haven't been able to lift yourself up out of it, or you're too focused on, pain, and truly all that there is love and light. And so, while there may be some reasoning behind that perspective, or some deep thought pattern that's led someone there, it can often bypass the reality that people are facing. And I find that especially true in context of activism. It can prevent people from taking action because they're kind of looking at things maybe with too much perspective or too disconnected.
Right. So you're saying sort of that like selfless movement, or like, this is bigger than you, or your problems are small compared to whatever. Is that what you're talking about? That dismissive kind of thing that we do? Like, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. It's, yeah. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it's highly annoying. It's highly annoying. I used to get that a lot at the church. You know what I mean? It's like they're there, here's a Bible verse. And on Sunday, there may be an opportunity for you to bask in the baptismal. And that's the short end of it. And like, I don't mean to be a cynic, but it's like, in some sentiment, yeah, like, it's nice to have like a good cry and a release. But also it's like, I also have questions about what's going on. And I'd like to know answers to my questions past like the light, live, love, laugh mantra.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, things are way dirtier and way more interesting than that. My mom sent me this meme last night, and I wish I could find it. I can't multitask when I'm doing this, but it was something like, all of life requires to be fed. So be careful what you're feeding. And I think that, on the other side of that, like, I think, where we're overly dismissive, I also think that there's, in our struggle, this awareness that we can bring to what fires we are tending and fanning, within ourselves and with each other. And I really don't think that that's about dismissiveness. I mean, I think it's about supporting each other to develop healthier ways of relating to our struggles, so that we can create balance, which is, from my perspective, the goal. We can't get rid of all that. We don't even want to get rid of all those dirty, nasty things about us. That's part of what makes us amazing, but it isn't who we are. And I think as oppressed people, who are intergenerational survivors of these really profound traumas. And like all of that beautiful history, we carry that too. And it's just remembering that our pain is not us. Our struggle is not what defines our identity. I'm Indigenous when I'm not in pain too. I'm Indigenous when I pay my bills. I'm Indigenous when I pay my taxes. I'm Indigenous when I succeed. I'm Indigenous when I'm joyful, and I'm Indigenous when I struggle, and when the grief is too big, then too. I'm Indigenous on the front line.
Yeah, really seeing the wholeness in each person and not just an individual as a fragmented part of themselves. We have just about 5 minutes left, and I have a thousand questions still, but maybe I'll just leave these last few minutes in case there are any questions that have been posed to the moderators. Peggy, I think you probably have a better sense of that than me.
Why is Peggy's picture Dre? I meant to ask that earlier. I was like, I see.
Okay, there's something that I probably missed in the chat because I haven't really been reading it. Someone is just talking about themes of criticism beyond being constructive and antagonistic, productive and destructive. And I didn't read the whole thing as it was typed out, but that's how it's been summarized. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting theme in context of this conversation, because I'm sure we all have examples of criticism being both really productive and really destructive. And maybe that's just an interesting thing for us to touch on before we close. Like, where is the line between those two things, and how we can use criticism constructively in these really important spheres of our life that we walk in.
I think it can come down to intention. Like, what is your intention? Is your intention to prove or convince someone that you're right and they're wrong, or they're right? You know what I mean? Or is it about understanding and also accepting that everyone does have a different perspective, and it's not about right or wrong. It's just, it really comes down to understanding and respect. I respect your perspective. I may not agree with it, and I may have my own critiques of it, but it's your life. Where it gets a little interesting, and I think going back to the activism part, is your perspective harmful to other people? Because your perspective is what you use to navigate through the world, right? So is it beneficial to others, or is it harmful? And that's a question that people really need to ask. That's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely mirror what Dre is saying. I've gotten to the habit of asking people, do you want to hear the truth, or do you want to hear what you want to hear? Because there's a difference, and some people want to hear what they want to hear. And yeah, I used to get in trouble for telling people my thoughts about a situation, and they didn't want to hear the truth, you know what I mean, based on my perspective, you know what I'm saying? So I've gotten to and also respect isn't uniform. That's also another thing. Like, what people deem as respectful and disrespectful is different all the way across the board. So I think that what it comes down to is relatability. It's just like, it's a relationship. It's like, what do you deem as disrespectful? What do you see as respectful? Like, what do you like and what don't you like? Conversational boundaries, I think, is also important, like what makes you feel unsafe in talking. So like intention, yeah, totally, like, is super important, but also like the nuance of the intention. It's just like, relating to the person, and coming from a place of love and not harm, I think, is also super important too. It's all relative, but having conversations like these where we can deconstruct all of it and come up with new and important methods of navigating uncomfortable and difficult conversations is, I think,
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. My mom was talking about this teaching of truth. Truth is one of like the 7 grandfather teachings that come from the Anishinaabe. And she said, you can't have truth without kindness. Otherwise, it's just facts. And facts are subjective anyways. If it can only be truth if it comes with kindness. So this idea of like brutal honesty, you know, it's not a real thing. It can't be, and that sort of that teaching she was referring to, it can't be honest if it's mean-spirited. That there's a separation of that, those concepts. And I thought that was really interesting and profound. And I think about that a lot in the reception of things and the transmission of things in conversations or whatever, you know, social media stuff or professional, personal spaces. It really actually has caused me to reframe my thinking a little bit around certain things that I find really helpful.
That's so important. Like, oh my God, like because it's so funny the other day, like, sorry, sidebar. This is so funny. But the other day I was telling a girlfriend of mine, I was like, yo, we need to talk. And she was like, Erks, I don't want to talk to you. Like, you know, she got so like freaked out. And I was like, what did I do wrong? And then one of my other girlfriends was like, you can't say we need to talk. It sounds like, you know, like dun dun dun. It's like the cliffhanger, you know what I mean? And I was like, oh shit, okay, like, so what can I say that's like less like dun dun dun? And I was just like, girl, can we have a convo? Like, you know what I mean? Like different ways of like, you know, asking this question, which I think in Western society has been framed in such a way that it's just like, we need to talk. Like, it's so aggressive and abrasive, but just like thinking and cross-examining all of the phrases that we're so accustomed to that are really generalized, that make people feel like anxious. Like, you know, I've taken like just like a step back to look at how and what I'm saying and how I can reframe it in a way that's more conducive to my personality, that makes the other person feel safer. So yeah, like I completely agree about the truth with kindness, because it's like, how would I want to hear it? You know, like what has made me feel the best?
Truth with kindness. I love that. So I'm sad that we have to close there because I feel like I could have this conversation for like years. But I want to say what an honor and a privilege it was to be moderating and to speak with all 3 of you. And yeah, thanks to everyone who was watching. I have no idea who you are, but I appreciate that you're here.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing today.
Yeah, I love spending time with you. And it's really just lovely to see your beautiful faces.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for having me. It's so nice to see everybody, and it's really awesome to know that you guys are well during this crazy time. And stay safe, take good care.
Yeah, take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pamapi, Guabaman.
Thank you.